some consulting work on American
feeling in the room was
Don't ever say to her that
What about the Chautauqua Institute?
introductory
discussion on the ethical
we left
more of a community.
before China took back over.
Currently doing in autism.
Throughout the history of college sports, nothing has been more troubling than maintaining the amateur status of student athletes. Alan Sack, author of Counterfeit Amateurs and College Athletes for Hire, was a highly recruited high school athlete from a small town near Philadelphia and a member of Notre Dame's 1966 national championship football team. Sack is now professor of management at the University of New Haven. He says the NCAA's dictate of amateurism is a fraudulent myth. We talked with Sack about what's gone wrong with intercollegiate athletics and what can be done about it. Here's our conversation with Alan Sack. Alan Sack, welcome to the conversation.
No, it's great to be here. It really is.
You played on Notre Dame's 1966 national championship football game, so you know firsthand what the demands are on student athletes. Give us an idea of what it was like to play for Coach Araper Segan.
First of all, the first-hand thing is I know firsthand 40 years ago. And
Things have changed.
I know secondhand from the point of view of now. And the changes are absolutely incredible. Playing for Ara, a real professional, a gentleman, someone I still respect. He wrote the foreword to my book. It was very nice of him. I stay in somewhat contact. Playing football at Notre Dame then I'm privileged. I feel incredibly privileged to have played with some of the finest arguably some of the finest college football players who've ever played the game. Alan Page, my friend, and he was a defensive end, now an associate justice of the Supreme Court in Minnesota. And Rocky Bleier, who played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Terry Hanratty, I can go on and on, I don't want to leave anybody out. Jim Lynch. And it was just a wonderful opportunity for me. And I started off, as I'm sure you're aware, I started off almost not playing at all, being a kind of a recruiting mistake as a quarterback. And to say what it was like for me to be able to go from the bottom, I mean, like maybe never getting a uniform on at Notre Dame, and then ended up playing and starting about three games in my senior year on a national championship football team. That's truly an incredible experience for me.
And the reason you weren't cut was because when you played, a scholarship was a 4-year commitment on the part of the university.
It was a commitment to me as a student, meaning that when recruiters came to my house and they said that they were going to give me a scholarship, they said it was they tell my mother and my father it was a 4-year scholarship, and if I had ended up being not as good as perhaps they thought I was, or if I were injured, my scholarship was guaranteed for 4 years. Even though I didn't really work out for them. So they were committed to me as a student, really, regardless of what happened on the athletic field, and now it's turned around totally from that. So I feel that's a privilege that young kids today do not have, and I'm not so sure why they shouldn't have the same privilege I had.
You say that the turning point, really, in terms of college football becoming counterfeit amateurs was in 1973. What happened in 1973? 1973
was very important. I went to Notre Dame, and I oftentimes talk about this when I go and do talks like this. When I went to Notre Dame, I chose Notre Dame over those other schools. And they offered me the 4-year scholarship. I had a 4-year scholarship. I got to Notre Dame, and if I had been injured or if I had been a recruiting mistake, I still had my scholarship, and they were committed to me as a student, as we said earlier. In 1976, or 1967, this is 1 year after I graduated. It was during that really turbulent times in terms of the political atmosphere on college campuses. After the 1968 Olympics, when John Carlos and Tommy Smith had done the Black Power salute, that led to an uprising on college campuses especially among black athletes, African-American athletes, some of whom, such as at the at Syracuse University, boycotted playing for Ben Schwartzwalter, I guess was the coach they had. They were still using things like calling black athletes boy. They still had no cheerleaders who were black, although a lot of blacks were on the football team. So at that particular point in time, there was a lot of ferment on college campuses. And players were actually boycotting, leaving teams. Therefore, the NCAA, I think, changed the rules at that point. I'm not going to say this is the total explanation for it, but it did influence the rule. In 1967, it was called the fraudulent misrepresentation rule. That meant that if you voluntarily withdrew from sports, I could have voluntarily withdrawn, arguably, and still had my athletic scholarships. But now, in 1967, it said if you voluntarily withdraw from sports, you lose your scholarship. Or if you do not follow the directives of your coach. That struck me as something that was hitting directly at these athletes who were protesting during the time. You could lose your scholarship. So a little more control was coming in there. I wasn't that much controlled, and certainly before 1956, when they had athletic scholarships at all, the athletes could do whatever they want. My sons went to like Division III kind of schools, and I know for a fact that if they decide not to play, they leave, they don't lose any financial aid. 1973 comes along. The 1967 rule allowed you to take the scholarship away from a voluntarily withdrawn kid or someone who had violated some of the rules of the coach. 1973 went a step even much further. It said that your scholarship was 1 year renewable and could be taken away for athletic ability and athletic performance. Right, as well as for injury. If you made a recruiting mistake, you could run them off, and that was legal under NCAA rules. Or I would say you could fire them. Now I start getting very, very legalistic about this whole thing, and I believe what I've tried to write in my book, there are tons and tons, enough books to fill probably a football locker room on commercialism and the impact that it has on college sports, and that's very true. But there are only a handful of books that are written about professionalism, meaning paying college athletes. All right, and my book is among those. In the former book I wrote with Alan Starowski, we argue very clearly from a legal point of view, not just as a figure of speech. We're saying literally in 1973 the college athletes became employees of universities. And coaches, yes. Employers. Yes, and the universities as employers. Yes, I really believe that that's happened at that particular point in time. Yes.
No, you mentioned just a moment ago coaches' salaries. You talked about corporate sponsorship. Of course, there's also the issue of playing regular season games on weekdays. What of what's happening do you find most disturbing? What motivates your current activism?
Well, that one point you just made about the games being played, I forgot to mention that earlier. At Notre Dame, we played 10 games in the season. Now they're playing 12 and perhaps even 13 games of football. I teach at a Division II school. We have 10 games in football, and I believe it is so healthy. I've actually seen this semester where some of my football players who are in my class, after that 10 games, those 10 games are over around Thanksgiving, whatever, they are different kids. They come in, they're not falling asleep. Now, I have to throw things at football players once in a while to keep them awake. After that, their whole attitude toward what's happening in the classroom changes. That's what I had when I was at Notre Dame. So what keeps me going on this whole thing, right? You asked me the question, what do I really, why did I stay on this thing for 40 years? I am very, very upset about it's intellectually dishonest to call today's big-time college athletes amateurs, when in fact they have nothing to do with amateurism whatsoever. And that's what bothers me more than anything. In fact, it's universities, and I walk around universities. I walked around yesterday with my wife here at Penn State, and you look at the tops of the buildings with the concrete or granite, and carved in these granite things are integrity, truth, justice, knowledge, and so forth. And here we have something on a total mythology, total myth, that big-time college athletes are amateurs, and we are not questioning it as faculty, and we're not questioning it as a nation, and that amateur label allows the universities, in my estimation, to exploit the athletes in a variety of ways. I think that's unconscionable, and that's why I keep writing these books.
The NCAA would argue that the student athlete is the amateur, but the athletic program is not amateur.
That's a fine, fine point. And it's one of the points I agree with Miles Brand, who has just recently passed away. A fine man. We disagreed about everything, not everything, but just about. I had a wonderful experience of interviewing him for my book, and Miles Brand was the president of the NCAA, for listeners who may not realize that.
He was a university president, so yes, kind of an unlikely, the first university president, a philosophy professor.
A philosophy professor. And he made the point that you just made. He said, amateurism defines the athletes, not the enterprise. Very interesting statement. Many Americans don't realize that. I agree with Miles Brand on that. In other words, amateurism and amateurism and commercialism are different things. Amateurism really refers to whether or not the athletes are being paid in some way or other. Commercialism has to do with how much money you're making at your university. You're making billion-dollar deals, that's commercialism. If you're paying the athletes, that's professionalism. Where Miles Brand and I disagreed, and we had a nice discussion about this back and forth on the phone, very subtle discussion about it. And from his point of view, he was very, very, very bright. I disagree that the athletes today are not paid. He says they are not paid. I say that they are paid, and that's where he says room, board, tuition, and fees is really not a contractual relationship with the university. I would say room, board, tuition, and fees, which are conditioned upon your being on the athletic field and performing well. And you can be fired if you can't. That constitutes a quid pro quo, an offer, an acceptance, and a consideration. Every definition of a contract I've ever heard about is there, in addition to the control factor that seems to be a legal defining characteristic of work, of employment. 1989, I started that survey, and I had been working with the National Football League Players Association. What I found, though, that 67% of the players who were in the NFL who had played in the Southeast Conference admitted taking money under the table. In the Southwest Conference, it was about the same. That doesn't exist anymore. They've broken up into the Big 12, and they're all over the place. But it was the Southwest Conference. I actually had one player who, when I asked them, did you take money? If so, what kind of things did you get? Most would say what they call them, handshakes, where they had an alumni would give you $100 with a handshake after a game. This guy had been offered part interest in an oil well, you know, and there were some people who were getting quite a bit of money back then. So large percentages, I concluded there was a vast underground economy in college sports of under-the-table payments from alumni. I believe it's still there and probably has increased, and I think that the agents have probably more involved than ever before. And I got a few flights back and forth to Notre Dame from Leonard Tost. And I have to admit, we also had a little trip down to New Orleans, and I would go in and I would write to Leonard Tost. In the beginning, I used to say, "Dear Mr. Tost, would you mind if you would give me some spending money to fly home for the vacation?" That was the promise. After 4 years, it was like, "Mr. Tost, send $400." But he was a nice guy, and the niceties had gone away. But now it's $230,000 with Reggie Bush, allegedly,
and Chris Webber.
And it's Chris Webber, you know, University of Michigan. Yeah, my God, I think it's widespread. It's widespread, and I think it deserves an investigation.
You have said, though, that while they're being paid under the table, realistically, you don't think paying student athletes, you think it's prohibitive. What then is the solution?
How's allowing an athlete to go out and make a talk about his experience at his university and making money for that? How does that really hurt the university or how does that hurt women's sports? How does that take away revenue? It does not. In other words, I think that the college athletes, who are now professionals anyway, should be able to engage in the same kind of entrepreneurial behavior that their celebrity coaches do. I see no reason why they should not be able to do that, other than that they'd be violating amateurism, and they're not, because they're not amateurs anyway. And I guess that's as well as I can sum up my position on that. I'd like to see the whole thing go back to need-based financial aid, and everybody's playing like the Ivy Leagues, but it's not realistic.
You talk about a collegiate model, and so the only way you could fire a student is if they didn't perform academically. So if they drop below 2.0 GPA, then they could be let go, but they wouldn't be let go because of poor performance on the field.
Thanks for bringing that up. That would be my first. Symbolic. It's not going to change it's not going to revolutionize college sport, but it will be in moving in the direction of what the NCAA claims its purpose is, to maintain athletes as an integral part of the student body. I always come back to that mission statement now whenever I get into discussions like this. If you ask me about should there be a playoff, or should there be, should the Big Ten expand to 14 schools or 100 schools or what have you, the first thing I would ask is, how does that contribute to the mission of the NCAA, which is to maintain athletes as an integral part of the student body? The suggestion I'm making with regard to if you take an athlete and you've recruited that athlete and given that athlete a scholarship, they should be able to stay until they get their degree. The only way they can leave is if they did not perform academically. It would be a lot like what I had when I was playing at Notre Dame. However, there's already the fraudulent misrepresentation rule that's in there from 1967. I'm getting a little arcane now, but listen to this for a second. I wouldn't touch that. That would mean that if a student walked away voluntarily, or if they started becoming totally outrageous in terms of their behavior relative to a coach, perhaps you could go to a committee on campus and that student could lose a scholarship. But you would not be able, I cannot imagine a mother and father in the country today who has a daughter or a son about ready to go to a large big-time college program who would disagree with this. I can't imagine it. I think that your son or daughter should never have their athletic scholarship taken away because they are injured. First, that should be done tomorrow. The NCAA should put that into legislation tomorrow, just on principle, just on general human principle and academic integrity, okay? And secondly, your son or daughter should never lose their scholarship because they ended up being less of an athlete than the coaches thought they were in the first place.
As long as they continue to show up for practice and contribute to the team.
And they're contributing.
I'm wondering, how much time are they investing in what you are calling a job? Is there enough time left over to really take advantage of their payment, which is this college degree?
Room, board, tuition, and fees can go over $50,000 a year today. That's a lot of money. That's not a small payment. In other words, when I get in arguments with people about whether college athletes should be paid, I'm not going to argue the issue of whether they're paid or not. They are paid. And I want to engage in that discussion. They're not amateurs. But it is a reasonable discussion to say, are they paid enough? In other words, we both agree they're paid, okay, but how much, what's too much and how much should they be paid? If you're getting room, board, tuition, and fees, tuition's the large chunk of this whole thing. And if you're not getting that education, then you're not getting that tuition compensation. So therefore, you're being totally exploited. And are they getting an education? In many universities, from what I can tell, I would say that the athletes are not being integrated into the student body. They're becoming skilled athletes who are segregated more or less.
You call it a vocational education in athletics is what they're getting.
Yeah, it is. They're getting primarily preparation to become a professional athlete. You know, they're getting ready to play football on Sundays primarily, and and they're not dumb. I don't believe in the dumb jock concept, but I believe that the whole motivational structure of young kids from the age that they're, even from junior high school and before, they've changed their entire attitude toward college and university. A college and a university in the United States has become a place where you go to get prepared for professional sports. Therefore, I've got to give all my time and all my effort, not only in high school and in elementary school, but once you get to college. Now, to answer your question, my God, up at 6 o'clock in the morning, at Notre Dame, they didn't bother me until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then they bothered me for about 3 or 4 hours, maybe through night.
You weren't working on the field 40 hours a week?
No, it wasn't 40 hours a week, and it was not all day long, and I wasn't lifting weights in the morning and going to classes and half asleep because of weightlifting. It was tough. I mean, they really pushed us hard. I can't imagine how modern-day athletes really survive. And my friends in certain groups like the Drake Group would say, how can a college athlete who comes to a university, who comes from a disadvantaged educational background, who is already terribly behind, very low SAT scores, poor reading skills. Perhaps a special admit. A special admit. How are they handling the incredible demands of big-time college football and basketball as they stand today and still maintaining eligibility? And many of them, and I'm going to use their term, they would say they think there's probably some academic fraud going on in here, and they're not blaming the athletes for it. They're saying that the universities, I hate to point out, use Binghamton as my example, it's just the most recent example. There are many, many, they're not alone. I have friends who say that if you did a congressional hearing on this, and they went in and investigated very, very deeply into what is really going on in the classroom for a lot of athletes, college athletes today, it would be a national scandal.
Would you advocate for the European club system? Education isn't part of it. You're here to be an athlete, go be an athlete.
Sure.
Could we do that here?
I'd advocate for it, but big-time college sports, commercial sports have become part of the fabric of American culture. For over 100 years, it's there as part of our culture. That's not going to change. I think that will be there. So we have to, I think realistically, we have to stick with that big-time commercialized college sport, but try to bring what's happening in the classroom for the students a little back the other direction.
If we did pay athletes a stipend, Would this eliminate, would there be bidding wars at college, or would there be a cap on how much of a stipend any university could pay? And would it eliminate under-the-table payments by wealthy alums?
No, it would not, no. Walter Byers, back in 1956, when he introduced the athletic scholarship, did so, and he says so in his book in 1995, I guess it's called, on sportsmanlike conduct, a very, very fine book. He was the executive director of the NCAA for at least 30 years, and he's the one who started athletic scholarships, because he thought they'd stop taking money under the table if we gave the scholarships. No way.
In fact,
just continued on.
The NCAA didn't really believe in scholarships when they were founded in 1906. It wasn't until I think 1957 where I think begrudgingly they said, okay, we need to provide scholarships.
Not only did they not believe in them, they felt that athletic scholarships were a blatant violation of amateurism, and they were absolutely correct. It is. An athletic scholarship is a financial inducement. The NCAA always was opposed to financial inducements based on athletic ability from 1906 until about, as you said, 1957.
The federal graduation rate, I think Notre Dame's is somewhere in the 78–79% of their athletes graduate. The powerhouses in football have 35% graduation rates.
Yeah, I've been following this closely for the last 2 years. Last year, the Oklahoma and Florida played in the championship game, national championship game. They had 36% federal graduation rates, respectively. What that means, the federal graduation rate means that means that 36% of the football players who came into the University of Florida as freshmen actually ended up getting a University of Florida degree. Now, what happened to the rest? Some of them transferred to other schools, some of them turned professional, some of them probably, transferred on their own, some were probably fired, like I talked about earlier. But the point is, if you're a mother or a father and you send your child to the University of Florida in football, you're probably saying they're not going to graduate from the University of Florida. Oklahoma had an identical 36% federal graduation rate. University of Florida as a whole had an 81% graduation rate for the general student body. That is a 45% gap.
Difference.
And what that means to me is you're not maintaining those athletes as an integral part of the student body. They're jumping from one school to another, they're transferring, they're being run off. And what they're really doing is you're looking for athletes who want to play football on Sundays. You're not looking for athletes who want to get a Penn State degree or a Notre Dame degree. Let's come back to those two. Penn State has last time I looked, it is an 85% federal graduation rate for the general student body and an 80% federal graduation rate, 4-year graduation rate for its football player. Whatever Joe Paterno is doing, it is good. I don't know how he's doing this, and he's still winning. I don't. It's a mystery to me. Maybe he could talk to me sometime. I'd love to talk to him, and we could spread that around elsewhere, okay?
And you say there is a link between FGR, federal graduation rate, and your success on the field.
Yeah, I think there is.
School.
Yeah, I'm just doing the statistics on that. Yes, there is a link, but not here. Notre Dame, I have to brag about my alma mater, my second alma mater, my first alma mater, 95% general graduation rate for the student body, and I would say about an 85 federal graduation rate for the football team. It's a 10% gap, but still, boy, you're way up there. And that means that football players are going to Penn State and to Notre Dame for reasons other than becoming professional athletes. There's something else they see about Penn State. There's something else they see about Notre Dame that makes them say, I want to stay in this place. And that's what I'm looking for. That's the academic side.
You and some others from the Drake Group say that what we need is congressional intervention. Others are saying we do not need the government involved in football.
I think we need reform at the NCAA level, but I see no leverage to get them to reform things. Right now, they're riding pretty powerfully behind a wave of support by the entire nation in many ways that think that they are doing the right thing, the defenders of amateurism. It's a lie, all right? But what we would like to see at the Drake Group is, I don't know anyone who wants to take away the tax-exempt status of big-time college sports. I don't know anyone who wants to do that. What we'd like to see is the threat of doing that. A very real threat from the House Ways and Means Committee, for instance, have hearings, and let's look at big-time college sports. Let's get a real good look at the kind of things that take place in the classrooms at universities throughout the country, and get real disclosure, disclosing what's going on. I think if they did that, that the NCAA would have to quickly start reforming itself. You wouldn't have to take away their tax exemption. What you have to do is make college sport truly maintaining athletes as an integral part of the student body, not just in rhetoric, but for real.
Many people say that what the reforms that you seek are an exercise in futility. Can they happen? Will they happen?
It's the issue of leverage and what would really push it to that stage. I'm a little cynical, and I'm a little pessimistic about change really taking place. To tell you the truth, what's really going to happen, I think the NCAA will continue to grow. It's going to move on, bigger conferences, more championship games within the conferences. The Big 12 will expand, the Big 10 will expand. These things are all for getting more money and more prestige and bragging rights for various universities. That's the reality. And what's going to happen? The athletes are going to organize. They already have. We now have the National College Players Association. I never thought I'd see that 30 years ago. Now we have the players. And when they start seeing their coaches' salaries go up to $8 million a year rather than $4 million, I think it's the athletes who are going to move this thing within the next couple of years. I hope that's not what happens. I hope the NCAA can really come back to grounding itself in the educational principles we all care about.
Alan Sack, thanks so much for talking with us.
That was great.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Alan Sack. Comcast subscribers can watch this program anytime on Penn State On Demand. Find out how through our website, conversations.psu.edu. You'll also find additional video clips from this interview and an excerpt from Counterfeit Amateurs. I'm Patty Satalia. We hope you'll join us for our next Conversation from Penn State.
If you've enjoyed Conversations from Penn State and would like to purchase a DVD of this show or any of our other episodes, order online at mediasales.psu.edu or call 1-800-770-2111.
Production funding provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Thank you. This has been a production of WPSU.